Coming to you live from Austin, Texas on this rainy day, it's Color Commentary, and we are Adrian Gonzalez.
And Michael Petchek.
Yeah. This week was a little weird. We actually got to play Magic in a store on Thursday thanks to Nerdstock Gaming, who is running Pauper on Thursdays here in Austin.
They just opened up like maybe 2 months ago.
Yes.
They're a little further north than our usual haunts, but you know, super clean store, super nice, very kind of new car smell still.
Yeah, they had TVs for our pairings, and they wanted us to report via match slips. There were only 8 of us. It was great.
Yeah, no, not the world's greatest turnout. Lots of new faces though, who we hadn't seen. I think we knew 4 out of the 8 there, and the other 4 were complete strangers. Oh no, 5 out of the 8, I guess. Yeah. So three new players is good, and I'm not going to complain about it. And then we also did F&M at Pat's, as we usually do, and I think we both ran the same decks for both events.
Yeah, I played Affinity both times, so very frustrating. I crushed Elves on Thursday. I lost horribly to them on Friday. Friday I didn't do very well, but Thursday I did fine. So
you went 2-0-1. You split in the finals.
On Thursday, yes. On Friday, I went like 1-2 drop, and then we went home.
I also went 1-2 drop, but I've been on Pig Trinket again because it is, my one true love in this format, and it felt really good. Like, I don't feel that a bunch of the games that I didn't win were because of misplays. It was like, I missed a land drop here, and the only thing I could have done about that is, drawing a land. Like, right. I didn't feel like any of them were massive misplays. Got to get a game in against Teachings. Nathan, our resident Teachings player, and I have a long storied history of going to time. So, what I do is, if he wins the first game, I just scoop it up because it's good for one game. And then the second one is just like terrible because we're both like whoever won the first game just plays to the draw.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It was really fun. We've gotten so good at that matchup where it was just like, it was like watching speed chess. Like we were just going back and forth, like turns took maybe 10 seconds apiece, and it was enjoyable. But, I'm back on the train. I'm back on the Pig Trinket bandwagon.
And I'm trying to get on the train. I'm on it on Moto, but Pats was missing 3 of the cards I needed to play it on Friday. Otherwise, I would have been playing it.
They don't have infinite stock of stuff. I mean, what was it? A Grim Harvest and 2 Undying Evils?
Yes. That's exactly what it was.
I mean, Grim Harvest is not like a super common card. I mean, it's from an old set that didn't get it wasn't opened widely, but I don't know. It was cool to play Pauper like 2 nights in a row, and I definitely felt more on the ball the second night because I had recent practice with the deck, and I'm starting to like get back into all the little minutia of like, figuring out odds on my draw and like trying to figure out like, okay, there's 4 cards here that save me. I've got like, I don't know, like a 10% chance of drawing 1 copy of them. And it was good. I don't know. I missed it.
I think we're gonna start hitting up Nerdstock on Thursdays though. So if you're in the Austin area, come check us out.
Yeah, no, it definitely super professional, super clean, very, very well run. Yeah, and it was kind of nice to have a change of venue, like just something new, right?
Right.
So for this week, we've got a interesting deck tech from John Euhen, who was actually streaming this the other day, and I didn't tune in because he described this deck, I believe, as Green-Red Madness, which completely lost any interest for me because I was like, that doesn't sound great.
This also isn't a Madness deck. At all.
Maybe I misread it, or I don't know why.
There's no Madness cards even in here.
No, I don't know. I could have sworn I saw, like, I'm playing Red-Green Madness in my stream, come watch. And I was like, I would rather not.
Yeah, Red-Green Madness is not the best deck, to put it lightly.
No, it's...
and in fact, it's not even really a deck that you can even really consider because some of the cards in are just so bad unless you're discarding them.
Yeah. So what this actually turns out to be is kind of a bloodbriar deck, and I've been fiddling with bloodbriar a lot.
It is a sweet card
because it's not Tarmogoyf, but it does a very, very good impression of it sometimes. And Tarmogoyf's a good card, right? I mean,
It's the best blue card ever printed, so I hear. I've never actually owned a Tarmogoyf.
I can believe that. I mean, you play Affinity in every format, so why would you ever own a Tarmogoyf?
Yeah.
But I mean, so bloodbriar, interestingly enough, funny you say the whole like best blue card. This actually is miserable with a lot of blue cards. Like that's the big difference between this and Tarmogoyf is just the fact that this works best with other green cards, some red cards, and some black cards.
Yeah. Bloodbriar, for those of you who don't know, is a 2/3 for 3 that gets a +1/+1 counter every time you sacrifice something. So it's great against edicts. It's great because our fixing is evolving wilds.
And I mean that's the really important thing. It's whenever you sacrifice a permanent, it doesn't care what type it is. It just cares that you sacrificed a thing. So obviously we got 4 bloodbriar right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And that is actually really kind of the top of the curve in this deck, which is great because this is fundamentally a 2-color aggro deck. And that is very tricky in this format.
Right, and it's red-green if that wasn't
yes. So then we got 4 Curd Apes, which I have disparaged before on this podcast. I forget, Curd Ape, it's 1 red for a 1/2, and then it gets +1/+1 if you have a forest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to remember if it was a 1/1 that got +1/+2 or no. Okay,
so it becomes a 2/3.
It becomes a 2/3 for 1, which is a non-insignificant body in this format. And as we go along, you'll see that it has a better chance of getting active than others.
Because the problem with Curd Ape in the past is that because we don't have duels, i.e., stomping grounds, Curd Ape is not really a 1-drop. I mean, it is, and then like you could play a forest the next turn. But you have to also have the other forest. Yeah. So it becomes, a little bit more of an investment. It takes a little bit more time to set up. And as in general, as we discussed, just not as good of a card. It's the same reason like Wild Macottle is not a good card and Domain Zoo is not a deck.
I mean, the other thing was, if you're in this heavy red-green deck, you kind of want to play some of the guild gates or the gain lands, and neither of them help you turn this card on. So
exactly.
Curd Ape, kind of subpar, but as we go, you might be able to see why we're both a little more okay with it in this list. We've got 3 Nimble Mongoose, just a solid card. Like in this deck, you're going to be filling your graveyard. 4 Plated Geopede. Plated Geopede is a landfall creature from the original Zendikar block. It's 1 and a red for a 1/1 with first strike, which is not great. But
worse than Striking Sliver.
Oh, yeah, I guess it is. But it has Landfall. And Landfall, it gets +2/+2. So, for example, not to skip too far ahead, but if you have an Evolving Wilds in hand and this guy on the board, you can play out your Evolving Wilds and then crack it later and swing for 5. 5 first strike damage, notably. Which,
it punches through basically anything.
Yeah. There's a one copy of McKindy's Slide Runner, which is a 2/1 for 1 and a red with Trample, and Landfall, it gets +1/+1. I guess kind of a concession that you can't run 5 Plated Geopedes, but
I mean, Trample is not insignificant. It'll get through some damage, hopefully.
And then the last one here, I'm just going to have to quickly look this one up because
did you mention the 2 Sakura Tribe Elders?
Oh, yes, 2 Sakura Tribe Elders because you can pop them, fix your mana.
And get a landfall trigger.
All at instant speed. Very relevant. Even though it's an onboard, trick, it still is a pretty decent trick. Like, it's not bad if you can go, all of a sudden, I'm going to, almost giant growth my dude in combat. It also is wonderful on defense because, you can just block, get another land. There's also our last creature in this deck is a 4 of Snapping Gnarlid. It's a 2/2 for 1 and a green, so just regular bear, but it gets +1/+1 when landfall happens. So
just an efficient beater in this deck.
Yeah, no, just very efficient.
This is a deck just full of efficient beaters. The only one is plated that's not efficient beater, I guess, is Sakura Tribe Elder, and then plated Geopede, sometimes just doesn't do a whole lot, but
yeah.
You have to sort of sequence your land drops correctly in this deck to really get the full effect.
Yes, and as we were touched upon earlier, Trample, very good for punching through damage. We've got 3 copies of Rancor in here, probably the best enchantment like the best aura in our format, I would say.
Right. I think the only other two that come close don't belong in a lot of decks, and they're Ethereal Armor because it's so good in Boggles, and Armadillo Cloak. I think those are my two runner-ups, but Rancor goes in more decks.
Yes,
So,
Rancor is definitely like an all-star. Then we got 3 copies of Groundswell. Groundswell is 1 green, instant, +2/+2 to target creature until end of turn, or +4/+4 if you have Landfall.
so perfect in this deck.
Yeah, just slots in there real nice. Now we're getting a little spicy. 2 copies of Harrow.
Well, let me guess. That's I think it's a 3-mana spell.
Yep.
You sacrifice a land and you search 2 lands.
Two
them on the
basics.
2 basics and put them on the
specifically.
battlefield.
Untapped, notably.
Is this a sorcery?
It's an instant.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, so if Plated Geopede's getting in there and they choose not to block it, you can snap this off and hit them for another 4 damage.
That's pretty good. Also, yeah, that's
Also, the untappedness is pretty good. You play something,
and then you can
turn
play another
1.
trick
You can even use one of the lands you just tapped to play Harrow.
and then sack it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's pretty good. I like that a lot.
Yep. Then we got 4 lightning bolts, just, the classic.
Yeah, just the best burn spell.
Followed by 3 copies of Searing Blaze, which is people probably know this. It's 2 red mana. You ping something for 1 and its owner for 1, and then if you have Landfall, it's 3 and 3.
And I imagine this card's actually important. Not only is it a good Landfall burn spell, but it also can clear a blocker, which is
Yes.
probably relevant.
Yes, I think that's the most relevant part of this. We got 4 copies of Vines of the Vastwood, kind of mandatory in most green beatdown decks.
It's a defensive spell. It's an offensive spell. You can target an Aura Narlid with it and get rid of all the enchantments. There's some shenanigans.
Yeah, there's some weird stuff you can do with this card. This is actually one which I have to explain constantly to people because you'll hear people being like the big trick with it is if your opponent's targeting their own creature, you can Vines of Vastwood it. It does not grant hexproof, even though it looks like it does.
No, it gains protection from spells your opponent controls.
Spells and abilities, actually.
Yeah. So you use it on your opponent's creature. It prevents their beneficial things from happening.
Yeah, you can use it as a weird counter spell, basically.
Right.
Then we move into the lands, and the lands are interesting. We're going to start off with the basics. 5 forests, 5 mountains.
That's bold. That's bold.
But total land count 19. The other 9 are 4 Evolving Wilds, 4 Terramorphic Expanses, and then a copy of Naya Panorama.
And so I also want to point out what's interesting here is there are no copies of Rugged Highlands.
Oh, no Rugged Highlands,
Because
no
you
Gruul
can't-
Guild
yeah.
Gates.
Yeah, you can't tutor them. And honestly, this deck is probably fine without them. The only card that might be a problem are Searing Blaze and Vines, but they're only 2 drops, cost 2 mana. So
The only thing I could think I might tweak with this land base is possibly trying out Gruul Turf, the red-green Karoo land, because that does bounce a land to your hand, gets an extra use out of it.
right.
Just something to, throw out there. Moving on to the sideboard, we got 3 relics, Relic of Progenituses.
Just a great
Yeah.
card. Very good against Drake.
You don't care about your graveyard, so you might as well run this one. We got 2 Brindleboars, 2 and a green, 2/2, sacrifice, gain 4 life.
Our favorite Grey Ogre from Pig Trinket, the namesake
Yep.
of the deck.
Yep. Just really in there for the burn matchup, I'm imagining. Honestly, I could see this being subbed out for Pulse of Marasa. Get back, another land, more landfall triggers.
Yeah. There's no way to recur the boar in this deck.
Yeah. We got 1 Martyr of Ashes, 1 red for a 1/1. You can pay 1 generic and reveal any number of red cards from your hand and hit every creature on the board for that much damage. Seems good. Then we got Scattershot Archer, 1 green for a 1/1. Or actually, I think it's a 1/2.
It's G for a 1/2.
Yeah, and it taps to ping each creature with flying for 1 damage.
Correct.
These are usually better in numbers because you can hit Delvers with them, but I don't think it's, Fatal Flaw or anything. 1 Seal of Fire, which is interesting. It's part of the Seal cycle, which were all delayed. They're enchantment versions of spells, and you sacrifice the enchantment to get the effect. Seal of Fire is a shock. Mm-hmm. Kind of interesting. I'm not sure why it's not shock, but I'm sure there's a reason.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know.
Then we got 3 Ancient Grudge. Blow up an artifact.
2 artifacts.
Two artifacts. You're already in red-green, so the flashback is just icing on the cake. We got 1 copy of Electrickery for the tokens matchup, 2 Pyroblasts, and a Gleeful Sabotage.
I'm not sure how I feel about Gleeful Sabotage. It seems okay, but you already have 3 copies of Ancient Grudge, so I think that could be slotted into something else.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I kind of like the fact that sometimes your Landfall dudes are just going to kind of be a little dirtily, and sometimes you're just going to need to blow up 2 artifacts or 2 enchantments, or an enchantment and an artifact,
That's fair. It is enchantment removal.
Yeah, I think the main reason it's in there is for a matchup like Boggles. So, moving on down a little bit, we actually have the price here. So this deck, is going to come in at $51.42 in paper as sourced from TCG Player. And on Card Hoarder, you could purchase all the cards for this for 42.22 ticks.
And the reason for this we were talking about is, Pyroblast is kind of expensive online. Most of this is probably in the sideboard. Relic's not super cheap. And then Lightning Bolt and Rancor are not cheap in paper, but those are both cards that you can play in other decks also. So there is some crossover value here, not in the creature base, but definitely in the instant and enchantment and the sideboard are all fairly. You can cross these over into other decks.
So I'm just looking through here. Bloodbriar really hasn't found another home yet that's put up results. Curd Ape is something that people have been brewing with for a while. Most of the creatures, aren't super format all-stars. Rancor does go into. I've seen it in Elves. I've seen it in Stompy. Boggles. So that's got decent cross deck interest. Groundswell shows up in Stompy. Lightning Bolt shows up in almost any deck with red in it, to be honest.
Searing Blaze is a burn spell, and then Vines of Vastwood also goes in Stompy.
Yeah, most of the sideboard, as you said, is applicable elsewhere. So I don't know. It's a little pricey for an intro to the format, but I don't think it's backbreaking. You will get use out of these cards. Not something I'd recommend right off the bat, especially because if someone's not super good about timing their land drops, it's got a little bit of complexity there.
It's a good deck. It is. I would still consider this a rogue deck, though. So if you're more interested in buying one of the format powerhouses, maybe not this one, but this is a very fun-looking deck, and it's definitely a deck I'm looking forward to trying out, but I've been playing Pauper for years. So.
Well, I mean, here, what if you buy, Stompy as your first deck? You could transition into this for relatively little.
Yeah, very easily. Most of the really expensive card in paper is Rancor. Rancor is something like $4.
Yeah, it's ridiculously high for something that's had, I think, 8 printings.
Yeah, it's up there.
But yeah, no, I definitely dig this list. It looks super sweet. It's a cool application of bloodbriar, which I have been hyped on since we saw it. So let's move into our discussion topics for the day. So, first discussion topic for the day is going to be battle boxes. And there's been a bunch of posts about this topic on the subreddit.
But cred where cred is due, Pupper Fox is the one who actually asked us about this on our Twitter.
Yes, we'd had the topic sitting in our planning document for months, and we just haven't gotten around to it. So we figured someone was interested. Let's give our opinion. That's why we're here.
So I'll preface this discussion with saying that Mike and I both own multiple decks. You could perceive them as being battle box-like. However, we do not plan for these decks to fight each other necessarily.
Yeah. So the battle box is loosely a collection of pauper decks that are curated and loaned out. I think the first big example I saw of this was some dude who put together 52 decks and then has a pack of playing cards, and each deck is assigned a value and suit. So you can just kind of be like, let's play pauper. Here, pick a card, any card. That's your deck.
That's kind of a cool way of doling them out.
Yeah, it's pretty neat, isn't it? But the idea is it lets you have this kind of fixed environment, and it also lets people play pauper without having to make any personal investment.
Right. So I would say the number one good thing about having a battle box or just a collection of Pauper decks is that you can be like, hey, let's play some Pauper. And people who are like, oh, I only play Modern, but you're like, you're the one with the Magic cards, and people who play Magic generally will take playing Magic over not playing Magic. I've noticed if there's a vacuum of things to play, so it could be a great way to get people interested in the format.
And I mean, so I probably at any given point have about 6 to 7 decks assembled. And sometimes I will show up. I bought KMC, the people who make the famous Hypermat sleeves.
Yeah.
They make a card carrier, which stores, I believe, 1,000 cards. So it's enough for quite a few decks. And it's made out of like a pretty strong plastic. It's got closing latches. Sometimes I'll toss that in my bag. And if I'm there waiting for F&M and someone's like, oh, does anyone have a deck to borrow? I can be like, I not only have a deck, I have 6 other decks. I can explain each one of them to you, and you can pick one and run with it.
Yeah, and by the way, KMC, best sleeves.
I like my Dragon Shield mats, but I can respect the KMCs. I kind of got burned the first time I bought them. There was like a bad batch that got shipped over a year or so ago, and I got a set of them, and they just fell apart.
I went from Dragon Shields to KMCs, have not looked back. Sorry, back to the discussion.
Yeah,
Just wanted to endorse
for a quick second
actually,
there. That is a decent point that actually brings something up. I bought a ton of my Dragon Shield black mats, all matching, because personally, I have a huge collection of Pauper cards. I like being able to go, oh, here's this sweet new deck. Let me pull these cards. They're already sleeved. I have, my lands that I like, and I'm good to go. With a battle box, like, if you're building 52 decks with sideboards, that is... I'm actually just going to pull out a calculator because I don't want to do the mental math on that.
And I will say, because Mike is going to tell you how expensive this is going to cost you in sleeves, but most stores, especially, maybe it's just our area, but a lot of stores will cut you a deal if you buy a ton of sleeves from them.
All right. So for 52 decks in that, scenario, 3,900 sleeves. Now, if you're going absolute, like, cut rate, like, let's say we just go with the bottom of the barrel plain color Ultra Pros. Those come in packs of 50, right? So that's 72 packs of plain Ultra Pros. And last I checked, Ultra Pros were like $3 a pop. That's $234 of bad sleeves. If you're going for like something even moderately good, it's like, this is not a cheap endeavor by any means. So, I'm going to tell people what I always tell them when they want to make cubes: do not skimp on your sleeves. You will regret it.
You have to buy more of the cheap ones.
Exactly.
I have never had a Dragon Shield. I think I might have had a Hypermat break, but they break very few and far between. Really, the only thing you have to do is sometimes they get a little gunked up. And that's when I replace mine. That's when they're a little gunky. Yeah,
there's also with some of the lines of Dragon Shields, they have that issue where the end of the sleeve starts to ripple.
Yeah, but Ultra Pros break every time.
Yeah, no, your Ultra Pros are not going to last you. So this is not a cheap proposition. Throwing together, I don't know, like 5 decks, manageable. You could probably get away with that for like a couple $100. But if you're going all in and you're being like, I want to have 52 decks, I want to have my pack of playing cards, that's a serious investment. Like, not every card in this format is dirt cheap. Like, Mono Black alone, in terms of like buying your playset of Chainer's Edicts and the 2 Oubliettes, you're already at like $60. So,
yeah. I mean, you don't have to do this all at once either, though. You could build them up over time. I started Pauper with one deck, and when it was Affinity, and it was not foil, and it was not beautiful. And now look at me.
Yeah. So for example, what I do is I just keep track of my collection, and I try and pick up play sets of stuff when it comes out, so that I just have a library, so I can do what I said. I see a sweet brew, I can go find the cards. They're all alphabetized, sorted, and I can just put the deck together, and there's no fear of oh, God, I got to go out and buy like $20 worth of cards. I just pull the cards and show up at F&M.
I'm still building up my collection. Mike, come organize it for me.
I don't tempt me. I'm really quick at organizing cards. So
we'll talk about it.
But I don't know. Pauper is cheap if you buy one deck. The moment you start really getting into the format, especially if you're like me who has like severe ADD when it comes to decks and not wanting to stick on them.
Now, look, you said in a recent twit post that the entirety of Pauper costs less than Jund in Modern.
It does.
So, I mean, cheap is relative, right? Like,
yes.
if you're a Modern player and you own Jund, like, you've spent a lot of money on it already.
Yeah. Jund, the Modern Jund lists clock in just a little shy of $2,000. For reference, a copy of every playable Pauper card, including the ones that I have deemed playable because I want to brew with them, I have a spreadsheet for myself. It's $1,500 start to finish for a playset of each card.
Right. So what we're saying is cost is relative. If you're willing to invest in a Jund Modern deck, you could. And it just depends, right? Like, don't feel bad because you're spending $1,500 is what I'm saying, because Magic players have spent way more on one deck than you're going to spend on this whole format. So don't let that dissuade you. Like I said, it may seem daunting. You don't have to do it all at once.
Also, I feel like I should throw this out there. Like, not everyone needs to own every card in this format either. Like, some people are happy, playing this one deck over and over and getting really good with it. And some people, just want a few decks that they've, taken their time. They've got all their foils and their altars. And that's fine too. But for the people who want, like, to have a lot of these resources, it's not very expensive in the great scheme of Magic. Like, I think when it's all said and done, and I have everything for Pauper, it's going to be, a non-insignificant value, but not anything where I'm like, oh God, I have to stress out and get like a lockbox for this. Right. I don't know.
I mean, some people, keep their power in like a safety deposit box, and it's like, what's the point?
Yeah. So when it comes to like battle boxes, the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out your lists, right? Like, if you want to do like a big scale, like 30, 40 decks, that's a lot of lists. Like,
you're going to have to plan a little.
Yeah, you're going to have to go, well, what do I want? And, I own a cube. I'm used to like curating collections to have them play the way I want them to. And sure, you've got some auto includes. Like, you probably want Mono Blue Delver in there just because it's been a mainstay of the format since Delver was printed.
Yeah, and you can take some lead from this from some of the posts on Reddit. And if you have trouble selecting decks, you could just go to MTG Goldfish and see what's popular and what people like to play and what's good. Or you could have a Pauper battle box full of weird brews. It's really up to you. Yeah.
One resource I would recommend is there is a user on Tapped Out who I believe his username is Fruity, Fruuty, who has a collection of Pauper lists that is frankly exhaustive. Like, we could actually probably do this podcast for like 2 or 3 years and not get through every deck at the rate of one deck tech per week.
Yeah. Like, that's a lot of decks.
And he has stuff that I've never seen anywhere else. Like, do you want a mono blue Trinket Mage deck? He's got it. Do you want to see, like, I don't know, he had a mono blue mill deck that uses Whirlpool Rider in combination with Jace's Erasure.
Oh, I actually played against the Bant Turbofog list I played that card.
Yeah.
I'm actually interested in this mono blue Trinket Mage list. We'll talk about that later, maybe. Keep going.
But he's definitely a great resource because, from what I understand, every time he sees brews, he just copies them over to his Tapped Out. And it's just a library of weird and interesting decks. And it also just has, like, your good meta standbys, like Affinity, Mono Blue Delver, Elves, Stompy. So that's a great resource. Obviously, MTG Goldfish is great for what's currently being played. Also, you can solicit suggestions online. Like, if you have, if let's say you're putting together 10 decks and you got 8 of them already, you could just make a post, and people do on the subreddit, where it's like, I'm building a battle box. I have the following 8 decks. Suggest 2 more for me to fill out this thing.
Yeah, battle boxes are a pretty popular topic on the Reddit. So
specifically as of late, like, I've seen a lot of posts for it. There was someone who actually sat down and broke down the full cost of his battle box, and it was a little stressful, because...
But it's good, because it means there's a lot of Pauper getting played somewhere out there.
Yeah, there's some playgroup that just has access to every part of the meta at their fingertips, and that's sweet. Another thing to point out is some people, like, we've definitely framed this from our point of view, where the main bonus for this is being able to loan these out at F&M.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who don't have F&M with Pauper. So
this is the closest thing that you're going to get to a meta format.
This could be something which, much like Cube, is kind of, something that can be enjoyed in the comfort of your own home. You got a couple buddies over, and it's like, let's play some Pauper. And, you can pick out some decks that you've never played before and just play some casual rounds. It just means that, instead of being over and being like, hey, did you bring your Pauper deck with me? Oh, no, I didn't. I left it at home. You just have access to this huge pile of sweet decks that are fully complete and, ready to go. And you can just play them against each other.
But speaking back to the F&M thing, if you have a Pauper battle box and you have all these decks, now that Wizards will sanction any event as a casual event, if the store, you just have to be like, hey, I have 8 decks. If I get 8 people, can we sanction an F&M event? And that's how you really get started doing F&M Pauper, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's how you start. You just set a precedent that you're going to be doing it on Fridays.
So locally, Logan, who works at Pat's, when we were first starting out, he threw together like 5 or 6 decks and just had them in a big box, and he would loan them out to people. When people would show up and they'd be like, oh, what events do you have tonight? He'd be like, oh, there's blah, 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 and Pauper. If you need a Pauper deck, I have a pile of them. And that really helped us in the early days because it meant that someone who was showing up on F&M, didn't really have a plan for what they wanted to play, could show up, play this new format at basically just cost of entry fee, and see what it was like. And that's great for helping out a format when it's just getting started out in your area at F&M. Another thing is, with regards to these battle boxes that I've seen some people do, is the extras. So you could just have a box with a bunch of decks in it, right? I've seen people who went through and there's the example of the guy with the deck of cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen this example where there was someone who went into Photoshop and made these little inserts that go in each of the deck boxes. And the insert has the full deck list, the sideboard, and then on the other side, it has a 2-paragraph explanation of how the deck plays.
What a nerd. I'm kidding. That does sound really awesome.
Well, yeah. I mean, it makes it much easier because that way, no one, if someone's in this position where they're like, they pull this deck out and they're like, I'm not really sure how this works.
Yeah, Drake combo.
Yeah, or one land spy, like
Pig trinket.
Like if someone shows up and you hand them one land spy, unless they have been playing combo decks for years, it's going to take a hot minute for them to figure out how it actually wins. So you can definitely do things to like embellish it a little bit, or get like a nice wood box. There's plenty of those. Like because I own a cube, I've been looking into like storage options, and of course, it costs half as much as the cube itself does, but there's some...
But hey, man, you got to keep it classy with these cards,
Yeah, there's some gorgeous boxes.
We actually have a guy locally who creates deck boxes.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to get his contact info from you.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that's worth talking about is actually having deck boxes. If you're going to take this to an F&M, handing someone a loose deck with nothing to hold it in.
Oh God, I didn't even consider that. I thought the deck box was kind of a given. Yes, you need deck boxes.
I mean, it's kind of a given, but yeah. And Ultra Pro makes a deck box, which is functionally just a box that will hold 75 sleeve cards.
It has 4 walls, a bottom, and a top.
And more importantly, the top is a lid.
Yeah.
Those are its good qualities that make it suited for this.
Yeah, the Ultra Pro boxes are pretty good. I prefer
like,
Legions, but they're more expensive.
The Ultra Pro boxes are like $2, I want to say. Like you can also order them online from somewhere like Potomac Distribution, who's also a great option for buying sleeves in bulk. And I want to say you can get like a 5-pack of them for like $7. And that's definitely going to be my recommendation. If you're going to do this, go check out Potomac Distribution. I believe their website is potomacdist.com. I could be wrong, though. Just Google them. They have amazing prices. For example, if you want to do Dragon Shields, box of Dragon Shields in the store, $10. A case from Potomac Distribution, which is 10 boxes of 100 sleeves apiece, $60.
Wow, that is a pretty good deal. That's like 40% off.
Yeah, that is a notable reduction. They also have I forget what they're called. I think they're called like variety cases, where you get 10 different colors. So, if you want your decks to be easily identifiable in the sleeves and you're not going to be swapping cards around between them, that works out great for you as well. But yeah, it's definitely something that you can do to help foster Pauper in your local area.
And, part of the other question of this was, what is the reasoning behind creating these? And the reasons are just, it's really whatever you want. It's like, maybe you just want to have these decks run a loan out. Maybe you're trying to get Pauper started in your area. We've gone over a whole bunch of them, but really, like, a battle box is a very good thing. If you're thinking about investing in one, it's a solid investment. And really, you're doing the community a huge favor. Like you're just doing something really big for the community if you're planning. Because like no one makes 52 decks and is like, well, I guess I'm just going to sit here with my 52 decks. They want people to play with them. And so if you want people to play with you, like this is really a great way to go.
Yeah. Another thing of note, BCW, the people who make those white ubiquitous card boxes that I'm sure your local game store stocks, they make ones that have vertical rows in them. Those are great for storing those aforementioned Ultra Pro deck boxes. I believe the example we kept referring to, the 52 deck battle box, is stored in, I want to say, one of the 3,200 count.
It's one of the
maybe.
big square ones, right?
Yeah, it's big. It's got vertical columns in it, and they fit in there great. So definitely, if you're trying to like get people to play Pauper, it's not a bad idea. If you don't have the budget for 52 decks, and I totally understand that, just pick up, like, I don't know, 4 decks. If you've got 4 decks, like, let's say you pick up Delver as your tempo deck, Stompy as your aggro deck, Mono Black Control as your control deck, and then, like, there's no good combo deck I can suggest that doesn't, like...
Just take, like, Kiln Fiend or something.
Yeah.
Quasi-combo.
Yeah. That gives you 4 very different experiences and showcases a lot of the powerful effects, like, all the great pump in Stompy and the super efficient creatures. Delver gets to showcase all the cantrips you get to play with. Kiln Fiend can win on turn 3, I believe.
Yeah, it's pretty
just
fast.
The absolute nut hand. And
the Mono Black is just, it does Mono Black stuff. Its creatures are gray ogres that do stuff.
Yeah. So definitely something that people should look into if you're trying to get this started off. So our second discussion topic for the day is sideboards. And I know this is going to sound super unprofessional, but we literally just got handed this discussion topic via the MTG Pauper Discord channel.
It's just in Pauper MTG Discord.
So thank you, Tasanara, from the MTG Discord channel, for giving us a last-minute thing because we weren't really feeling a lot of the discussions we had listed already.
Yeah, great community on that Discord channel. They just put a post on Reddit. Join it. It's full of great people. I think it's a little bit more Euro-based right now.
It seems like it's pretty widespread.
Okay,
like,
cool.
There's definitely like Euro people in there who, they're like, I'm going to bed, and you're like, but it's 5 p.m. Why would you do that? But our topic today is sideboards and how to build them.
Yes. And so we were talking a little bit right before we right after we came up with that, just to get a feel for the topic. And in my opinion, there are 3 different kinds of sideboards. There are very broad answer sideboards, like the one I have with Affinity. There are very narrow answered sideboards, which I don't think are as common in Pauper as they are in, say, Modern or Legacy. And by that I mean sideboards that are defined by archetype winning cards, where like half of their, most of their sideboard is useless, but they always need to bring in like 2 or 3 cards against very specific matchups. And then there are transformative sideboards, and by that we mean there are decks that turn into other decks. Either they have like another win con, so let's say Teachings plays against Mono Black Control. They board out all their creatures and they bring in like 2 Curse the Bloody Tomes.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And transformative are definitely like the rarest in this format. Like, obviously, the goal of a sideboard is to shore up a match where you don't think you can win, or where you think you would have a better chance at closing out game 2 by tweaking it a little bit.
Yeah, like you need a little bit more of an edge.
Yeah. So there are kind of like broad oeuvres of different sideboard cards, and you kind of want a decent amount of most of these if you have access to them. Obviously, Pauper has like certain effects that don't stray outside certain colors. Like, I'm trying to think of a great example. Like, red does not get enchantment removal. You're never sideboarding into enchantment removal. The best you can do is if they're playing a blue enchantment, side in your Pyroblasts.
Right.
So obviously you want as many of these, and you probably want to tune them towards your bad matchups, you know. Teachings is going to sideboard into more removal against an aggressive deck and more control elements against another control deck.
And something I want to hit on while we're on the subject of like changing out for bad matchups, there have been articles written, and I know they're about Modern, about Jund versus Tron and Modern, and how you just might as well not even sideboard for the matchup because the matchup is so bad for you as Jund.
Yeah.
And so that's something you want to take into consideration as well. Like for me and Pauper versus Tron, I've decided I just hope they don't draw a Fingered Marauder because it's almost because like getting rid of it is too hard, and I don't want to have to dedicate sideboard slots to it.
Well, so there's definitely a decent amount of that within Pauper. Like, there's some matchups with certain decks where I just feel good enough where it's just like, I'm just going to run back those 60. There's nothing in my sideboard that drastically improves this matchup. Why even bother? Like, I'm just going to, like, disassemble a bit of the synergy that was there before in favor of, like, a tiny percentage point higher of winning. So there's times to sideboard, there's times to not sideboard. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about building a sideboard.
Right.
So there's, you know, as I mentioned, there's kind of genres of sideboard cards. One of the first and most common currently is definitely going to be Graveyard Hate.
These are your Relic of Progenitus, your Bojuka Bogs, although those can be main board, your Nihil Spellbombs. This is anything that just interacts favorably with your Tormod's Crypt. It just needs to interact favorably with your opponent's graveyard.
Small note, Tormod's Crypt, paper exclusive, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
In that case, Fairy Macabre.
Yeah, Fairy Macabre. And these are really, you know, they're pretty popular right now because it does kind of stop the Drake combo. Look, we got to like 40 minutes in and I didn't say the D word.
Yeah, here we are.
But again, that's why sideboards are good. They help you beat decks that are known to be in the meta.
Right, and like Graveyard Head is very good against that, against a specific deck.
It's good against other decks, you know. Tortured Existence has a bad time if you can exile their graveyard. Certain builds of Teachings can have a bad time if they're running, you know, Accumulated Knowledge over Think Twice, which is actually why a lot of them run Think Twice. So it's not as great against them as you might expect, but, you know.
So this is actually kind of interesting because, you know, right off the bat, we have these, you know, quote-unquote narrow sideboard cards in that they only interact with your opponent's graveyard, but because the graveyard is such a big resource in Pauper, you should have some sort of Graveyard Hate in your sideboard unless you're like mono-red aggro, basically, and in which case you could maybe afford to play something a little different, a little bit more damage heavy. And
I definitely think one of the big decisions here is it usually comes down to Relic of Progenitus versus Nihil Spellbomb. Those are the two I see the most. Mm-hmm. I've seen people advocate for Fairy Macabre getting more play because it is free. Your opponent can't see it coming unless they've looked at your hand. And it doesn't get eaten by a duress. It picks out two things exactly as you need them. But in general, it comes down to these two one-drop artifacts. Relic can, of course, eat cards progressively and then pop itself to exile both graveyards. Whereas, you know, Nihil Spellbomb is target player's graveyard.
So yeah, it seems like we're sort of splitting hairs here, but it is a big difference. If you're also a graveyard deck, you want to play Nihil Spellbomb.
Yeah, you want to play a Nihil Spellbomb. You want to play a Fairy Macabre, especially in like Tortured Existence. Fairy Macabre is great because you can keep reusing it for free, basically. But you definitely want some level of Graveyard Hate if you can't beat graveyard-based decks. And honestly, there are some decks that just fold to the turn one Relic. Like, they can't handle that. Next on the list, this is really restricted to a color, Hand Hate. That's only Black's real wheelhouse.
Right, and here we're talking about Duress, Wrench Mind, anything that could destroy your opponent's hand.
Yes, and these sort of come in against your combo matchups where your opponent needs to hit specific quantities of specific cards to be able to make their deck do what you want.
And in our format, I would make an argument that these are also good against control decks that want to sit back on a handful of cards.
Yes, they can also be great in those matchups. And Wrenchmind is a doozy of a card.
Yeah, Wrenchmind's an amazing card.
It's not Hymn to Torok. It looks very similar to Hymn to Torok, but it's a card good enough that you see people like. I've seen this question a decent amount on like the subreddit from newer players where it's like, this deck is running one or two artifact lands. Why is that? And the answer is Wrenchmind. Because Wrenchmind, for those who don't know, 2 black mana, sorcery, target player discards 2 cards from their hand unless they discard an artifact from their hand. So people will run artifact lands just to be able to make that less painful.
My deck is very Wrenchmind proof, thankfully.
Yeah. An example of somewhere you don't bring it in.
Yeah.
But Hand Hate, very much definitely a black thing. I think there is one card in Pauper that is not black that lets you make your opponent discard cards, and that is
Piracy Charm?
Piracy Charm. Oh, I guess actually, Funeral Charm's black, isn't it?
Yes.
So Piracy Charm, notably an instant, you can do it on their draw step if they're Hellbent. Real mean. Next up, we've got very specific counter spells.
Here we're talking about cards like Exclude, which counters a creature, Dispel, counters an instant, Remove Soul.
Yeah, and a lot of these, I feel like Remove Soul and Exclude you can kind of main deck because most decks play creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Dispel is kind of what I think of when I think of like the classic sideboard counterspell, because it is cheaper than counterspell, but way, way more narrow. So in those matchups where the mana actually matters and you want to be able to like dispel with a backup dispel in case they have the counter, it's great. So again, this is very much Black's wheelhouse of things. Blue. What am I talking about here? There's only one black counterspell in this format and it's awful. But you definitely have this whole like selection of narrow counterspells.
Steel Sabotage, Annul also fall into this.
Yep. Negate, even in some cases, is a sideboard option. That's actually pretty common in multicolor combo decks because it's easier to cast than counterspell, and it deals with either removal or other counterspells. But it's not a huge portion of sideboard cards, and it is very much just kind of something blue gets. Next up is extra removal.
And so extra removal is actually pretty key in Pauper. You'll see a lot of cards like Dead Weight in sideboards, Pestilence, Crypt Rats. And that sounds like a lot of black. I personally run 2 Bolts in my board, although some lists are known to run Journey to Nowheres in their board.
Exactly. I was just going to bring up Journeys. Sometimes you'll see Oblivion Rings in boards just because they need to answer a permanent that is not a creature or a land. But yeah, sometimes against another deck with a bunch of creatures, you just need to jam in more removal. You need more edicts. You need more targeted removal. The other thing is you can also make that swap. For example, mono black is mostly edicts. They run, at most a playset of Victim of Nights. And sometimes they'll run, a Doomblade out of the board. So they can have a little bit more targeted removal against those decks that go tall, or decks that go wide rather than tall. So they can remove the thing that's actually the problem.
Or another thing that's a little bit later. We can just go into it. Sweepers.
Yeah, sweepers.
So if they go wide and your edicts are suddenly bad, we have access to cards like Shrivel, Crypt Rats, for non-black decks like Trickery,
Holy Light,
Echoing Truth.
Yeah, there's this whole wide array of these weird niche sweepers, and it's kind of one of those things we've touched upon before. We don't have a proper Wrath effect in the format. We just have these niche sweepers, but I think they go over all 5 colors. White has Holy Light, blue has Fade Away. I guess green doesn't have one, but apart from that, there's some variant of a sweeper in almost every color. And these are for your goblins, elves, white weenie.
I mean, I think we looked at the numbers once. Like Trickery is one of the most popular sideboard cards in the format, isn't it?
Yes,
and like Trickery is just so good against so many decks. It's also even good against boggles if you're on the play.
Yeah, like it's got a wide range of situations where it applies, and it kind of is, a format all-star. Crypt Rats is another favorite. Sometimes Pestilence. It really depends on what deck you're going with, but both those are ways where you can clear out a board really quickly. Then we've got also extra draw cards, and this is kind of a weird one. You'll see extra cards which have draw a card on them in the sideboards of some control decks, and that's kind of to mitigate the card advantage that your opponent can get in control mirrors.
And the specific example we talked about this is Deep Analysis, because it draws you 4 cards off of 1 card.
Yeah, and specifically that shows up in one of our favorites, Pig Trinket, in the sideboard as a one of. The pig comes. And then it's kind of a bit of a rarer one, though. It only matters in very grindy matchups where you need to dig to your answers before they dig to theirs.
Or you just need to just in terms of raw card advantage, you just need to get the upper hand.
Yeah, you just need to have more things than they do. And again, kind of narrow, but it does show up from time to time. It's mostly in blue decks as well. I don't think I've ever seen like a black deck that runs like a couple of Night's Whisper in the board.
No.
But then kind of again a narrow one that shows up a lot more in our format than anywhere else. Life Gain. Life Gain is a thing.
And there's a bunch of Life Gain cards. I think we talked about Feed the Clan.
Yep.
Talked about
Rest for the Weary sometimes sees play. 1 and a white, gain 4 life. If you had Landfall this turn, gain 8.
And that's just because red decks are... Burn is pretty popular on Moto. It's more popular than you'd think. So Life Gain is always going to receive some amount of dedication.
And I think the big thing with picking your life gain cards, you either want them to do something besides gaining life as well, like a Pulse of Marasa, or you want it to be a huge amount of life.
Like in Feed the Clan, which is 10.
Feed the Clan is 10 life.
If you have Ferocious.
If you have Ferocious, and the decks that play it usually do. Let's be fair. But Feeding the Clan, that against Burn, that's even if they have Fire Blasts, that's 3 cards that they have to play.
10 is a lot of life.
Yeah, it's 3 cards or more that they have to play to equal your 1. So it's a form of card advantage in this matchup. So you'll usually see any deck that doesn't have a main board way of gaining life. Like, for example, Soul Sisters does not play additional life gain in its board.
They just don't need it. They have 12 ways to do it. So.
Yeah. But as soon as you get into decks that don't have a main board way to gain life and deal with how quick burn can be, you start seeing these life gain cards that, again, either they have to gain a ton of life or they have to do something else. Because just pure life gain is generally bad. Like, no one's sideboarding Chaplain's Blessing from Shadows over Innistrad. But, again, kind of weird. Definitely a thing in our format, though.
And we also have very narrow hosers. And this is a little bit... Like, these cards make up part of your sideboard in Pauper, but it's not like Modern, where you basically are going to win off of the top 10 to 12 cards of your library, and like you need to mulligan aggressively to find these. These are like Circle of Protections, Ancient Grudges, Gorilla Shamans,
the Hydro Pyroblast, and any sort of like color specific or like very narrow targets.
Coral Net,
yeah, like just all these very strange and dedicated narrow things, because I'm sure you have strong feelings about Gorilla Shaman.
I have very strong feelings. I hashtag ban Gorilla Shaman, unban Cranial Plating.
Because if they land that turn 1, like, your outs are Galv Blast and a red source and Darksteel Citadel.
It's not great. Yeah, Gorilla Shaman is a very oppressive card for Affinity. But in that same vein, there's actually a couple more. There's Ancient Grudge. There's Lethal Sabotage. I think Affinity has a lot of very egregious hate printed for it because it's very strong.
Yeah.
But it's not the only thing that gets targeted by a very specific removal like this.
The Circles of Protection can be brutal because I've played a decent amount of aggro mono red decks. Watching a Cop Red come down turn 2 is like a piece of my soul is being ripped out.
That's how Mike and I first met. I think we've talked about this on the podcast.
Yeah,
I played Cop Red and
I was on Goblins.
And we played for a few more turns and Well, Flaring Pain would have been good there.
Yeah, I think I ran it in my board for a while in Goblins for that very reason. But yeah,
And
no,
then,
it's...
so then you have this weird other thing, right? Where it's like, I'm bringing in Cop Red, you should bring in Flaring Pain and make sure that it's a sideboard answer to a sideboard card.
Yeah, and I guess that could be its own category of like sideboard for sideboard cards, and those only usually come out game 3 unless you really know that 100% sure your opponent has this sideboard card and they will bring it in. With stuff like, yeah, you're gonna bring in Cop Red if you have it, and if your opponent's on white, you can probably guess that Cop Red's coming in. And so a red deck is probably going to sideboard in Flaring Pain because it's the natural counter there.
Right.
But you definitely want like some of each of these, and you kind of want to tailor a sideboard to be helping you on your weakest matchups. If you have a bad time against Affinity, maybe a little bit more Artifact Hate than anything else. If you have a really bad time against, let's say, Control, and you have black available to you, you side in like your Duresses and your Wrench Mines because that lets you pick apart the stuff that's hard to deal with out of their hand.
So I feel like another thing that we should talk about is how much you can over sideboard.
Yes.
You can totally over sideboard either in that you've dedicated too many slots to a specific matchup, or you're bringing in too many cards and you're disrupting your natural game plan. I personally do not like to bring in more than 3 to 4 sideboard cards in a matchup. So my sideboard reflects that. I have a very broad sideboard with some very flexible answers and like only maybe 1 or 2 very narrow answers.
Do you want to get upset right now?
Sure.
Ask me how many cards I brought in on Friday playing Pig Trinket on
how many
one
cards?
match.
What was the matchup?
Stompy.
How many cards did you bring in for Pig Trinket against Stompy?
10.
All right, so I need to think about it. So you brought in the Crypt Rats, you brought in the pig, you brought in
Duresses.
Why Duress? I guess, yeah.
So if they get off to a fast start, I only brought in I think 2 of those.
Duress is okay.
Then I brought in Wicker Bows, and I brought in Nihil Spellbombs to help draw and also take care of Young Wolves.
That all seems good.
Yeah. Like, there are times where you just go, well, I guess I'm sideboarding in 10 out of 15. But most of the time, you're going to want to be... If your deck is robust enough, most of your matchups, you should be saying, here's 3 cards that will, bump me up from, this being a 50-50 to being a 55-45 matchup in my favor.
Yeah.
So definitely be careful. You don't want to... The cards you're bringing in shouldn't weaken your overall deck plan.
Right.
You should be supplementing it. I think that's one of the best ways to think about it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I guess that's most of what we wanted to discuss in respects to sideboards.
Yeah, sideboards are great. They're a supplement. Yeah, they're a supplement to your main deck, and so it's totally possible for you to board out too many cards, and you got to be careful.
Yeah, and also definitely tune your sideboard. If you're expecting a certain deck to show up a lot, like if I don't know, you're going to a tournament and you know that there's like 5 people who are going to show up with elves. Maybe you get an extra slot or 2 worth of sweepers, and you just for this tournament, nothing else, just this one time.
Yeah, that's the great thing about sideboards.
Yeah, you can really pick and choose and figure out what's going to be best in the moment. So be amenable to altering your sideboard. There's always a better solution to your deck. All right, so. Right before we do our little outro, rather, I'm just going to remind people on the 28th of August, if you are in Austin, Texas, swing by Pat's Games. There will be a Rags to Riches styled large-scale pauper event with ridiculous prizes attached. I think I saw a Tarmogoyf listed. I think I saw Liliana of the Veil listed.
And your boys from Color Commentary will be doing the coverage. We'll be streaming it on our Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/Color Commentary.
Yeah, it's gonna be real fun. We still have to figure out some of the technical side of things, but we should be streaming live. You're going to be able to hear us, giving our feedback in real time to a game where we only have partial information.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be an experience, if nothing else. But that kind of brings us to our closing end of the show routine. Thanks to Pat's Games for giving us a place to play Weekly Popper, and thanks to L for the use of his song Quantitative as our theme music. His music can be found on SoundCloud under the name LLL. Remember to subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. We're also on iTunes, and if you subscribe there, please leave an iTunes review. It really helps us out. If you have an idea for a discussion topic or a deck list you would like us to discuss, you can either use the contact form on our website or email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. I'm Michael Petchek.
And I'm Adrian Gonzalez.
Signing off for Color Commentary.